And I think in real life, I experience a lot of respect from younger people, but it's not shown on the screen or on the stage as much.
Hello and welcome back to the third act. I'm Catherine Fairweather. There's nothing like a dame, especially when it's Dame Harriet Walter. She has enjoyed an incredible stage career as a predominantly Shakespearean actress of exceptional elegance and depth. Now in her 71st year, she's having an extraordinary run as a versatile and nuanced actress of film and TV screen, playing complex characters that help to challenge and redefine the female role model. She has appeared in popular series such as The Crown and Downton Abbey, and her recent award-winning successes include Dasher in Killing Eve and the part of Caroline Collingwood, the matriarch and estranged wife in HBO's Succession. I'm thrilled and honoured to be able to reel Dame Harriet into the calm surroundings of Calford's restaurant at Auriens. I began by asking her about the way in which her career has taken off in a new direction and what she thinks is the reason behind this.
There are a lot of contributory factors. I think partly having done such a great body of work on stage, I mean, when I say great, I don't mean to describe the quality of my work. I mean great opportunities on stage. And if I have any regrets, it's that I didn't do more film and TV when I was younger. But on the other side of it was this great, wonderful sort of body of Shakespearean stuff and modern plays. I didn't only do Shakespeare, but, you know, the theatre experience was invaluable. And you see, I think sort of Netflix and all these huge organisations that have profited during lockdown have very much benefited from the training and talent of theatre actors who couldn't do stage work during that period. You know, I mean, you look at The Crown, for instance, they're all pretty much stage actors. And I think that's partly the attraction. But, you know, British actors are quite popular at the moment because of not just, you know, they know how to keep a part going for a long period, whatever it is, but because they're also quite personable. We know how to work together. You know, if you're working in a theatre, you have to sort of rub along well with a lot of very different people. And there's something about that as opposed to a sort of rather exclusive greenhouse nurturing of stars in the sort of Hollywood setup that makes us quite popular. So I also think Eileen Atkins was right when she said to me years ago, if you don't do anything to your face and don't sort of get rid of the wrinkles, you'll be able to play sort of older characters in history and things like that, which is quite true in a way. And also I swapped agents. I think that might have something to do with it. Not to put down my older agents, but just that sometimes if you're in an agency for a long time, they tend to sort of, you tend to be seen in the same light, whereas a new agent might suddenly lift you into a different place.
You were playing Frosty Matriarchs, or somebody called it, I think.
Yes, I mean, if you want to categorise, I hate categorising because actually my job is to find the difference between them all. But, yes, I seem to get them quite nasty characters, which I like if they're funny. You know, if there's wit involved, then they're enjoyable. But if they're just nasty and just narrow-minded, it's rather...
two-dimensional.
It's kind of two-dimensional and doesn't do our reputation as older women any good, you know.
Absolutely not. Well, sort of, you know, emaciated bitches.
Yes, always in opposition to the young love, you know, always the obstruction, the narrow force against the, you know, the broadening.
Well, I think you actually played, I haven't seen the third series of Succession, but the bits that I have seen, the first two, I thought you played a very complex, interesting role in the supposed bitchy mother, because she's reaching out to those children. You can see and their shutters come down. They didn't give her a chance.
Well, that's a wonderful piece of writing because you know, it's interesting that I've had sort of other offers of nasty mothers and you go, well, actually, it's not the nasty mother factor that I enjoy playing. It's the writing I enjoy because the writing in Succession leaves so much room for layers and depth and complexity and a sort of backstory you don't know about and a history in the family that you don't know about. It's not explicit, it's implicit, it's complicated and therefore very rich to play. Plus she's quite funny, you know, I mean, I have some great lines. So that's totally in a league of its own.
So is the character inspired by Lady Caroline Blackwood? Because I was reading the letters between her or Robert Lowell, and I think he described her, because he was married to her, as a sort of mermaid-like figure, dining on the bones of her wounded lovers. She was a wit and quite an operator, wasn't she?
Well, I know Jesse said that that's who he had in his head, but he also had a couple of other people that we discussed, I will remain secret about. And at one point, because you really only see the very smallest tip of the iceberg in that character, at one point I wrote myself a sort of backstory because I realised I had the time to do that. Jesse had to take care of several other characters. And I sent it to him. And we were sort of in agreement about the type of woman she was. And she herself comes from quite a damaged background and a sort of loveless family herself. So there's that element of perpetuating the cycle and being attracted to money that is not sort of stuffy old English money, which she came from. Rather exciting, the raciness of the sort of self-made man and the New York life and the drugs. You know, that's what I've sort of put into my brain, that she was like a good time girl for, you know, sort of, that's how she met him, that's how she got into that world. And then, you know, had 3 children without a maternal instinct.
God, that's a whole other television series.
Well,
That would be great.
You'd have to have a young Harriet Walter play me, though. I'm afraid that's a sadness.
No, the makeup artists can do great.
They can. They could have. I'm doing something right now where I have to flash back 20-something years, and I said, I hope you don't get another actor because, you know, it's so seldom. It bothers me as a spectator when they don't quite match up and you don't believe they're the same person. And, you know, you do all this work. I mean, obviously, if you're a child or a teenager, you can't be played. But anybody sort of after 40, I think I could, you know, I don't want somebody else to play that because you've built this character, you know. And they said, no, we do it all digitally, you know. So they're doing all these kind of clever things.
So you haven't had a fallow period in the last couple of years, then?
No, I haven't. You know, and the thing is, I've never really been out of work for very long. Because I suppose I've always sort of, I've fanned myself out into so many different areas that one or other of these prongs will come back to me with a job at some point. I haven't always been as picky as I should have been, I suppose. But I've kept going, and in a way that's been important.
And there's a motto there, isn't it? Just say yes, because you never know what...
Yes, because lots of things lead to other things. Yeah. That's right. You don't just do the job for the job's sake. You do it for what else you might get out of it. Yeah. Yeah,
and I would say that sort of looking over your career, it's interesting. You haven't, although you are a Shakespearean, you know, trained classical Shakespearean actress, you've done so many other things, and that's really interesting. And you don't seem to be particularly snobby about what you're going to
No. I like you putting it that way.
No, that's great. You also played a rather fascinating part in a film called The End.
Yes.
Which is about dying, isn't it?
Yes,
how to live well and how to die well. And I think that's a subject that possibly we need to have more of a conversation about in the world, because everyone is so keen on keeping people alive at all costs that we lose sight of what it means to have a good life.
Yeah, and I think our age group, if I can bracket you in, I've no idea how old you are, but roughly speaking, we were the first generation, I think, that sort of set the fashion, set the tone. You know, previous generations had always sort of aspired to be like their parents, or, you know, to move up into the bracket of authority and all that. And we were sort of the youth generation where Mick Jagger was our icon, you know. And so in a way, that same generation now where, a lot of us are not quite facing the fact, like me even saying, you know, I've always been a girl. That's sort of what I'm talking about, that we're not really quite facing our own mortality. You know, we think that we can sort of rewrite the story. And while we can keep being youthful as long as possible, we're still going to end up where we're going to end up. And we've got to look at that somehow. And, you know, contemporaries are sadly getting ill or dying. You know, that's going to happen increasingly. And we've got to kind of look it in the eye, really. So it's a balancing act where that is very much part of your landscape, but at the same time you don't want to succumb to it or give in to negativity.
And I suppose, so for you, the secret of aging well is to work.
It's to work, well, you know, my area of work doesn't stop. You can act until you're 93, but what has become more and more of a preoccupation is health and keeping fit. I walk a lot. First thing I do every day is go for a walk. And I eat very moderately, drink very moderately, don't smoke, those sorts of things. And I'm not crazy, but it's very much something I used to take for granted, and now it's in the forefront.
And you, sorry to interrupt you, but you also keep your brain engaged and elastic, don't you?
Yeah. Yes. I don't know whether this kind of is true or not, but throughout lockdown, I've done masses of crosswords, puzzles, enigma things, da-da-da. And I've also picked up the piano again. And I'm not in any way a pianist, but learning sort of the left hand and the right hand going together in a complicated piece of Bach is a terribly good mental exercise. Absolutely. And it's not familiar to me, so whole new bits of my brain.
You strike me as someone who is driven. Are you able to sit on a sofa and do nothing?
No. No, that's very perceptive of you. I am driven, and I always wondered why, particularly, and what I'm driving at. But yes, there's always a certain aspiration. There's never a sort of satisfied moment when I think, oh, I've done it. But I'm much kinder to myself than I used to be. I give myself lots of excuses, like, I don't compete with people in a younger age group. That's rather great now to say, well, look, I'm never going to be as fast as them. I'm never going to be as good as them. I'm never going to be as beautiful as her. And it lets you off lots of hooks. So it's quite, in some ways, I'm more relaxed.
You were an academic child. You did very well at school, and you got into Oxford, you didn't go to Oxford. I'm quite interested why you didn't. If you had something to prove and you were driven, why did you? Because you wanted to be an actress. Mm-hmm. Is that why?
It's very interesting because I didn't want to go to university. It wasn't part of my plan. And my grandfather, who I've now discovered, all I knew about him was he was a terrifying old deaf man in a wing-back chair who shouted at you, I didn't really know him. But I got the message in my final term at boarding school when I was longing to just get out and, have fun. My father said, your grandfather would like to pay for you to go to Oxford or Cambridge, and you've got to sit the exam. So coming straight out of school, I had to go straight into exams and all of that. And I got in, but at the same time I escaped into London. I'd left and I sort of was tasting the world. And I went for my interview in Oxford at Lady Margaret Hall. And, in those days, they were single-sex colleges. It would have been like going on into more boarding school.
Yes.
And it was never part of my plan. So it wasn't like, oh, gosh, I've got in, now I'm going to ditch it. It was, I'm going to please my grandfather, show that I'm willing, but actually I want to be an actor. Mm. And I look back at that and think, what an extraordinary thing, because I remember ringing my father and saying, I don't want to go.
Was he disappointed?
Well, that's what's so strange. I think I was blessed with a rather unambitious father who also had a bit of a thing with his dad of not wanting to necessarily do what his dad wanted him to do. I was rather chuffed that I was going my own way. I think that's my theory. But there was this beautiful thing where when I was 30 and I was playing Ophelia at the Royal Court, and I was already doing it, and it had obviously my chosen path was going to extend. And at that point, and only at that point, my father produced this letter my grandfather had written, saying this, that he was very shocked that I wasn't going to university and that I was foolish and that on no account should she follow this flibberty-gibbet of the theatre, your affectionate father, And he died a year later anyway. But I loved the fact that my father only showed me that letter 12 years later.
Yes, that's great.
Very cool.
But actually, what a wonderful career to have for someone who enjoys reading and sort of plunging and going down rabbit holes of academia.
I don't think anything is wasted. I think
it's all grist to your mill, isn't it?
Absolutely. And people I know who aren't very academic sort of learn a whole lot in the theatre. It's as if they call it their university, because there is a lot. You do a lot of research. You get involved in different worlds, and we're curious people by nature, I think, and so you follow your nose and find you've learnt something in life.
So tell me about, your lucky break happened in the 70s.
Yes.
And that was a...
Yes, we all sort of wonder when it started, and that, for me, I know when it started. It started with this total accident, like so many things, where I'd been mucking about for 5 years in sort of fringe theatre, in the days when you didn't really need an agent, it was sort of word of mouth. People sort of said, oh, there's something going on at blah, blah, and you walked in and tried it out. And, it was fun while it lasted, but it wasn't going to get me where I wanted to be. And there's this company called Joint Stock, run by David Hare, Max Stafford Clark, Bill Gaskell, and, some people who really had experience in the theatre but had decided to be alternative. And I heard on the grapevine, that they were auditioning for this adaptation of The Ragged Trouser Philanthropist, which is a big fat book on the beginning of the labour movement in this country. And it sounds very dry, but it's sort of written with Dickensian humour and lots of characters and things. And then I was told, that they've finished the auditions. He doesn't want to see any more women. And I was just so determined. Before mobile phones, before anything like that, I used to have to sort of drop pennies in the coin box every hour. Any chance, no agent, just pushing myself. And that complete pursuance of something, which I didn't know I was kind of capable of. I wasn't terribly pushy in real life, but this was just, I knew it. And right at the end of that week, he said, he's seen everyone, he doesn't like any of them, he's starting again, will you come in and see him next week?
Wow.
And I got the job. And everybody came to that show, because it was absolutely wonderful. Peter Hall, Richard Aird, Trevor Nunn, all these people came to see that show.
And that launched your career.
Yeah, I would say so.
So this lucky break, however, this was in the mid-70s, so you were in your 20s.
I was late 20s, and my first TV job, I was 29, but I did look a lot younger, and I was playing 19, 20-year-olds, and that gave me a sort of 10-year extra lease of life in the profession. For a long time, people thought I was younger than I was. And then Shakespeare, you can do, I played Cleopatra at 53, for 55 actually. You can do a lot of things on stage late in life. And now I'm finding I can do quite a lot on screen as an old woman. But that middle age is very hard for women. That sort of 40 to 60 kind of period is very hard for women, I think.
We need more Cleopatra characters.
Yes. And people are discussing it a lot, and it is out there as something on the agenda. Well, but it doesn't have to be fixed around age. Again, you're being defined by your age, aren't you? And men aren't so closely defined by their age. And also, pretty much every character that I've played or that I know of, female characters on the whole, there will be a few exceptions. They're there in relation to a family or a man. So you're either somebody's wife or mother or grandmother or daughter, girlfriend. So therefore, your casting possibilities are even narrower, because you've got to be convincingly somebody's mother. You're too young for her, you're too old for that, you get those kind of comments when you go up for a job. They liked you a lot, but you're a bit too old for so-and-so, or you're a bit too young for such and such, because you're always in relation to another person. And I think that's how people define women in the outer world as well. It's very, very rare to have it's happening more now that sort of people are defined by their jobs or by their thoughts or their books or their actions or their,
Yes. It's a time for women when they come, they're not in the first flush of youthful beauty, but they come into their own. They've got confidence and experience. The having the babies thing is behind them, so they can achieve so much. And it should be a time in our lives, that midlife time in our lives, which can be really, truly celebrated. And I think it's only beginning to happen now.
I absolutely agree. I mean, just when we've got something to say, we start being shut up. And I think, we rely on drama and literature and things like that to reflect us. I mean, I think in real life, I experience a lot of respect from younger people and people wanting to know what I think in real life. But it's not shown on the screen or on the stage as much. So, in a way, the media have got to catch up with real life.
Is ageism in our society worse or better than it was in your youth, do you think? Do you think we're finding a way of breaking the ageist?
Oh, there are a lot of things that we moan about and say things were better in our day, but I really have to get a perspective on it and say that every social category is now much freer than it used to be. We've made leaps and bounds since my youth when people were absolutely, I don't know what it was like to be old then, but people were much more trapped in their categories, and the gender fluidity we've got now, I think the age fluidity we've got now, marriage, divorce, who you live with, same-sex marriage, gay couples adopting children.
That's great.
Massive opening up of things. And there aren't really any rigid rules. And if we follow some idea of a rigid rule, more fool us, because actually
there are no rigid rules.
Nobody's told us we have to.
In fact, didn't you, when you realised there weren't enough Shakespearean female parts for you, didn't you start playing men's parts?
Yes. And now that's become fairly normal.
Yes, fantastic. That's so fantastic.
And the other interesting thing was we weren't the first either. You start to look into history and you realise that women have often played men's parts in Shakespeare. And, if I had my time over, I'd be digging out female history and, just like there's a big movement to look at black history. It's so regrettable that things weren't recorded, that women didn't feel permitted to be ambitious. There's so much lost potential and lost talent in history, and I think we can get quite arrogant and think we're the first people to ever have thought something or ever have done something, but why would a woman living 200 years ago not have felt as sort of repressed by all this as I did, Of course they did.
Of course they did. You only have to look at one's grandmothers to understand how repressed their lives were.
Yes, and if I play lots of bitchy people, I always look into what disappointment, what repression, what unhappiness they've had to endure, that if they'd been allowed to, they might have been a very different person.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. But you've broken many rules, or rather you've done things your own way throughout your career and life. You got married in your 60s. That's pretty amazing.
Very good time to get married.
Yeah, I think so. Got married almost 40. But
that's good.
But,
yes,
but 60s is even better. And so is marriage wonderful?
It's very good, yes, because you have much more common sense when you get to that age about, people's foibles, and you don't expect anyone to be perfect. I was a horrible perfectionist when I was younger. If your husband, if the hair was out of place or he spat or, you go,
there's a knife and fork.
Yeah, I don't like you anymore, And now we have terrible rows, but we know they're just silly rows and they'll be over in a minute. And knowing that he also has lived that long, we're at the same age, that's great. It's very relaxing in a way.
And what next for you? What's on the horizon next?
This year I'm doing a TV series for Apple TV, which is called Wool, based on the Wool trilogy, which was a sort of New York Times bestseller. It's kind of dystopian future. Interesting. Quite gloomy, but interesting, playing an American old woman. And then I hope a film in the summer in England with a lot of older characters, which is it's really about older people and how they're going to live, which is, I hope, will come off.
Oh, interesting.
I hope will happen.
And so here you are in your 71st year.
Mm-hmm.
What would you tell your 21-year-old self? Knowing what you know now about life, would you give your 21-year-old self any advice?
Oh, gosh, it's so difficult. I'd just try and make myself more confident. I was so unconfident then. And I really didn't think I was very attractive or pretty or good at anything. Well, I thought I was good at acting and that was it. But I would try and give myself confidence, because I know I've had a great career, but I'd have had a sort of better career earlier if I'd had the confidence and wasn't always thinking somebody else ahead of me knew more than I did. You did sort of look up to people and think everybody else was cleverer than you and everybody else was better than you. And I'd like to just tell myself,
yes,
you're as good as anyone else, you'll be okay.
Yes. And I suppose that also ties in with regrets. I think that's a regret as well, isn't it? That one didn't have that. When you look at pictures of yourself when you were 21, gorgeous. Why didn't we all know that?
I know. Absolutely.
Still gorgeous, by the way.
But, no, I really, really, that was one of the things I suppose I grew up with some very beautiful people, and I always sort of compared myself unfavourably with them. And, comparison is a terrible thing, isn't it? But we compare ourselves to people and measure ourselves up against people. And it takes a long time to just say, I am who I am, and compare yourself with your own record.
Mm-hmm. And you don't have any regrets about not having children? That was the choice you made.
I don't. I feel rather ghastly because I think mothers are so selfless and wonderful. I can't do that. I couldn't give up what I wanted to do in order to make space for somebody else.
Yeah.
And that's an awful confession. I'll do things for other people. I'm quite sort of altruistic. I'm a good aunt. I sort of help out in charities. But the actual sort of responsibility for a lifetime of even having a dog, I don't feel capable of being that tied down.
Are you call yourself a free spirit?
A bit of a free spirit, yes. Or I like to feel I can be, yes.
It's interesting because your sister, who's also, I think of her as a free spirit, but she had lots of children. So you're both free spirits in very different ways.
Yes, that's right. She's got a lot of strength in a certain way to do things her own way. I was more of a sheep, I think, when I was young than she ever was. So Charlotte's really creative. She's incredibly creative. And that's how she's expressed it, in creating homes and places and environments and ethos of bringing up her children.
Yes, exactly. Her creativity's gone into that direction. Yours has gone. It's so fascinating when I see you both.
I don't think of myself as creative. I think of myself as interpretive, communicative. I don't think I'm a creator. I think I'm a communicator.
Oh, that's interesting. So you wouldn't say that any of your interpretation of, say, Cleopatra or Queen Elizabeth you're creating your own version of Queen Elizabeth.
I am, but the mainspring, the sort of the core of it is somebody else's creativity. Shakespeare or Schiller or Jesse Armstrong, whoever's kind of had the idea, invented the person, given them the lines, and then I kind of connect with that stream of creativity and lend myself to it. And so I make the bridge between them and the audience, but it's very much sort of the material's been established for me.
I think it's also quite intellectual. I think you think around the subject. You bring all the stuff that you know to play, the historical context, the psychological context, and that's why they're endlessly interesting characters, because you bring so much to the role.
Well, that's nice for you to say. I mean, you're not supposed to be an intellectual actor. It's sort of, you're supposed to be instinctive and not use your brain in a sort of interfering way. I need my brain to kind of interest myself, get completely convinced by something, enrich it for myself. But ultimately, I've got to drop all that and live it and breathe it,
But you can't stop being an intelligent person playing an intelligent person, can you?
Well, I think intelligence and perceptivity and all those things make anything you do. If you're a carpenter, you'll be a better carpenter if you use your brain. You can enrich things by thinking around them and knowing more and learning more. That's kind of quite a good mission to have.
And finally, if we were sitting around this table and planning our last supper, which is a bit of a gloomy thought, what would we be eating and who would you invite?
That's terribly hard. This is our last supper.
Yeah.
I'd eat lots and lots of naughty things that I hadn't allowed myself. I'd probably have lots to drink because I've never really let myself go in that way.
Really?
I don't think my capacity would be large enough for what I'd really want to indulge in. But people, who would I want? I suppose I'd want to get to know some really young people. Are you talking about people who are dead already?
They could be dead or alive.
Well, of course I want to meet Shakespeare.
Yes, of course.
Desperate to meet Shakespeare. Who else?
Young. Who young would you have then, since you just said you want to know?
Well, the people I don't know. Because I think what happens is we go, oh, it's so sad so-and-so's died, or, no, there'll never be another so-and-so. But it's because we don't know all these wonderful people coming up behind us who might be absolutely brilliant, politicians of the future, artists of the future that we don't know, who are just being born.
And there's nothing better than a table of different generations anyway.
I agree. That's why I sort of question anything that's exclusively for any age group. I think it's a wonderful place to come and gather and know that you're of a like mind. But one of the things I treasure most about the acting profession is that you mix with every age group.
And actually that to me is the definition of aging well or fending off old ages. being in that mixed environment.
And not having children or grandchildren, it's sort of very important to me to have friends. I've got friends in every generation, and I love that.
Yes, I think that's absolutely the secret. And long may you go on.
Thank you, my dear.
It's lovely seeing you.
Thank you very much.
If you've enjoyed today's show, you can hear more episodes in the series by clicking follow wherever you're listening to this, or simply searching The Third Act on Apple Podcasts, Spotify and YouTube. And if you think your friends would love to listen, please do tell them about the series. This episode was produced by Pete Norton and made possible by Auriens, luxurious residences that are redefining later living in the heart of Chelsea. I'm Catherine Fairweather, and I'll see you back next week for another episode of The Third Act.